Lucas, do you copy? This is Rhodes. All instruments are glitching.
You know that moment on a flight when the engine noise fades, just slightly, and the entire cabin goes quiet for half a second? Most people ignore it. They look at their phones, sip their drinks, adjust their seatbelt, and pretend nothing happened. But if you've ever been in the cockpit, you know that silence means something is wrong. Very wrong. My name is Daniel Mercer, and I was the last person to hear the voice of Flight 702 before it disappeared. Officially, the plane crashed somewhere over the North Atlantic. But that's not what happened, because Flight 702 never landed, and according to the instruments that night, it never crashed either. It just vanished, and what we heard over the radio before the signal died still keeps me awake at night, because the last words from that cockpit weren't a mayday call. They were a whisper that said, "It's still out there." It started on a normal Tuesday night shift at the Shannon Oceanic Control Center. If you've never heard of it, that's not surprising. Our job is simple. Guide planes safely across the Atlantic. Thousands of flights pass through our airspace every year. Most nights are quiet. You track the aircraft, check altitude reports, confirm positions, and occasionally talk a nervous pilot through bad weather. Routine. Predictable. Safe. Flight 702 entered our airspace at 2:17 a.m., a Boeing 787 Dreamliner flying from Boston to Frankfurt. 242 passengers. 11 crew. Captain Elliot Rhodes was in command. He'd been flying for almost 25 years. Veteran pilot. Perfect safety record. The kind of man you'd trust with your life without thinking twice. First, everything looked normal. Altitude, 36,000 feet. Speed, steady. Course, stable. They checked in with the usual report. Shannon Control. This is Atlantic 702 maintaining flight level 360. I responded like I had 1,000 times before. Atlantic 702, Shannon Control, radar contact confirmed. Routine. But about 20 minutes later, something strange happened. The plane's transponder flickered. Not off, not malfunctioning, just flickered. For a moment, the altitude read 38,000 feet, then back to 36,000, then 40,000, then normal again. I frowned and leaned closer to the screen. Glitches happen sometimes, but not like that. So I called them. Atlantic 702, Shannon Control. Confirm altitude 360. There was a pause. A longer pause than usual. Then Captain Rhodes answered. Shannon Control, we're reading. Stand by. His voice sounded off. Not panicked, but confused. Which is worse, because experienced pilots don't get confused. Another 10 seconds passed. Then he came back on. Control. Our instruments just spiked. I asked the obvious question. What kind of spike? More silence. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. Altitude shows 70,000 feet. I actually laughed, because that's impossible. Commercial jets physically cannot reach that altitude. Even military aircraft struggle at those levels. So I assumed a sensor failure. Atlantic 702, confirm cabin pressure stable. Pressure normal. Any turbulence? Negative. Visual conditions? Clear sky. Everything normal. Except the instruments. I told them to reset their navigation systems. They acknowledged. And for a moment, everything seemed fine again. The plane stabilized. Altitude returned to 36,000 feet. But then, the radar echo changed. Not position. Not speed. Something else. The signal itself. Radar works by bouncing radio waves off metal surfaces. Planes show up clearly. But Flight 702's return signal started behaving strangely. Like the aircraft was fading. Not disappearing. Just fading. I called them again. Atlantic 702. Confirm all systems operating. The co-pilot answered this time. First Officer Lucas Wren. His voice was quieter. Control. Do you see another aircraft near us? I checked the radar. Nothing. No traffic within 100 miles. Another pause. Then he said something I still hear in my dreams. There's something outside the window. That's when the room changed. Air traffic control centers are usually loud. Phones ringing. Controllers talking. Keyboards clicking. But when I repeated his words to the supervisor, everything went silent. I asked him what he meant. He didn't answer immediately. Then Captain Rhodes came back on the radio. His voice was tight now. Control. We have an object pacing us. My skin went cold. Because pilots don't say object unless they have no idea what they're looking at. And that almost never happens. I checked every frequency. Military radar. Nearby aircraft. Weather satellites. Nothing. No storm. No aircraft. No drones. Nothing. So I asked the question. Describe the object. Another long pause. Then Rhodes said quietly, "It's the size of a plane." The room went dead silent. What kind of plane? It's not a plane. That's when the radar altitude spiked again. 36,000, 41,000, 52,000, 68,000. Then normal again. But the pilots hadn't climbed. Their pressure sensors still read stable, which meant the radar wasn't tracking altitude anymore. It was tracking something else. I asked them if the object had lights. Rhodes answered slowly. No lights. Any shape. Hard to tell. Is it metallic? Another pause. Then the words that made the supervisor grab a headset beside me. It's absorbing the starlight. And that's when the passengers started screaming. We heard it faintly through the cockpit microphone. Distant. Panicked. People shouting. Someone crying. Then the co-pilot shouted something away from the mic. Rhodes came back on the radio, and his voice had changed completely. Control. It's getting closer. I asked if they could maneuver. He tried. But then he said something that froze the entire control room. The instruments aren't responding. The plane began descending. Not diving. Not falling. Just slowly sinking from 36,000 feet. Down, down, down. But the engines were still running. Full thrust. And yet the altitude kept dropping. 34,000. 32,000. 30,000. Then Rhodes said something very quietly. It's underneath us now. The passengers were screaming louder. Someone banged on the cockpit door. The co-pilot shouted again. Then a sound came over the radio. A sound I've never heard before. It was like static, but deeper. Almost like a heartbeat made of radio noise. Then the altitude stopped dropping. Exactly at 28,000 feet. For about 10 seconds, everything was still. No one spoke. Then Rhodes whispered something. Not to us. To himself. Oh my God. I asked what he saw. He didn't answer. Instead he said something else. Something that made the supervisor slam his hand on the console. Control. The ocean is gone. When Captain Rhodes said, "The ocean is gone," everyone in the control room thought we misheard him, because outside that cockpit window, there should have been nothing but black Atlantic water reflecting the moonlight. Instead, Rhodes repeated it, slowly, like he was trying to convince himself it was real. There's no water. I asked what he meant. He didn't answer right away. Then First Officer Wren leaned into the microphone. His breathing sounded shaky. Control. The surface below us isn't moving. I stared at the radar screen. Explain. Another pause. Then he said, "It looks solid. At 28,000 feet altitude. That makes no sense. Even if they were above land, they should see coastlines, cities, clouds, not a perfectly flat surface." So I checked the flight path again. They were 450 miles from the nearest continent. Pure ocean. No islands. Nothing. But then Rhodes said the sentence that still haunts me. It's not the ocean anymore. And before I could respond, the radar return from Flight 702 changed again. This time the signal didn't flicker. It split. Two identical echoes appeared on the screen. Same altitude. Same speed. Same position. Two planes. One transponder. My supervisor leaned over my shoulder. Is that interference? I didn't answer, because both echoes started moving in opposite directions. One continued on the original flight path toward Europe. The other descended, slowly, silently, still showing the same transponder code, meaning the radar believed both were Flight 702. But that's impossible. You cannot duplicate a transponder signal without physically having the aircraft. I called them again. Atlantic 702, confirm altitude. Rhodes answered immediately. Still 28,000. But the radar showed two planes now. One at 28,000. One climbing rapidly past 40,000. Control? Do you see it? Rhodes asked. Yes. His next words chilled the room. Then you know we're not alone up here. Passengers were screaming again. Louder now. Something slammed against the cockpit door. Then Ren shouted. It's above us. The climbing radar echo reached 70,000 feet. Then 90,000. Then it stopped. And the signal disappeared. Gone. No descent. No debris. Just gone. But Flight 702 was still on the radar. Still at 28,000 feet. Still transmitting. But something had changed. The radar reflection looked wrong. Like the aircraft's shape had warped. I called them again. Atlantic 702. Confirm aircraft condition. Rhodes didn't respond. Instead, we heard him talking to the co-pilot, not realizing his microphone was still live. You see them too? Ren answered quietly. Yeah. Count them. A long silence. Then Ren whispered. 6. My supervisor grabbed the microphone. Captain Rhodes, what do you see? For a moment, there was no response. Then he spoke, and his voice sounded hollow. They're flying beside us. I checked the radar again. Still only one aircraft. Describe them. Rhodes inhaled slowly. They look like planes. My heart started pounding. What kind of planes? Another pause. Then the words that made my hands shake. Our plane. The room exploded with shouting. Controllers arguing. Supervisors calling military channels. But the radio was still live. And we heard Rhodes say something to Ren. They're copying us. Copying. They're matching our speed. Our movements. The co-pilot's voice cracked. What if they're trying to replace us? No one in the control room spoke. Then something slammed against the fuselage. The passengers started screaming again. Rhodes shouted. One just moved in front. The radio filled with static. That deep heartbeat noise returned. Boom, 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 like something massive pulsing through the airwaves. Then Rhodes whispered again. They're opening. Opening what? Ren asked. Rhodes answered in a terrified whisper. Their doors. That's when every radar screen in the control center went black. Just for 1 second. When they came back online, Flight 702 was gone. No crash signal. No debris field. No emergency beacon. Nothing. Just empty sky. We called them for 4 hours. No answer. Military search aircraft scanned the Atlantic for 2 days. Nothing. No wreckage. No oil slick. No bodies. The official report says Flight 702 likely suffered catastrophic structural failure and crashed into deep ocean waters. But that's not true, because the radar logs still exist. And the last transmission from Captain Rhodes was recorded, after the signal supposedly vanished. Exactly 7 minutes later. The audio file is only 5 seconds long. Most people think it's just static. But when engineers enhanced the recording, you could hear a voice, very faint, very far away. Not Rhodes, not Ren, something else. And it said one sentence. Slow, calm, almost curious. Another one arrived. Then the recording ends. No one knows where Flight 702 went. But sometimes, late at night, air traffic controllers monitoring Atlantic frequencies report something strange. A weak transponder signal. Flying at exactly 28,000 feet. Moving slowly across empty radar screens. Always the same code. Flight 702. And occasionally, very occasionally, someone hears a faint whisper over the radio. Not a distress call. Not a mayday. Just one question. Soft. confused, like someone who woke up somewhere they shouldn't be. Is this still Earth?